Welcome back to the Mandarin Blueprint podcast. I'm here with Faraz. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Is it
Yeah,
Faraz?
Faraz.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'm here with Faraz, and Faraz has kindly agreed to do a case study with us about his experiences with Mandarin Blueprint. But before we get into anything specific to Mandarin Blueprint, what made you want to start learning Chinese in the first place, Faraz?
Well, there's kind of a long story to this. So I have been interested in sort of like memory athletics, memory techniques for a long time, like since freshman year of college. I read the book Moonwalking with Einstein, and I got really into memorizing decks of cards, memorizing long digits of numbers, all that stuff. And at the time, I was a pre-med major. So I tried to find something, practical to apply this to. And I applied it to like learning mitosis, meiosis, Krebs cycle, all that. But it turned out that pre-med and me do not get along. I did not find it very interesting. I did not find it very fulfilling. So I switched to engineering, and I really did not find any application for these sort of memory techniques beyond sort of parlor tricks once I got on the engineering route. So I always like had them in my back pocket, and I always thought they were pretty cool, but I didn't do much with them. So fast forward, I think it's been like 6-7 years since then. Like 3-4 years out of college now. And a couple of things happened at the same time. So one of them was, so I work for a company that makes 3D printers. I'm the head of software. And
Wow,
we have
cool.
engineering teams like throughout the world. And we've got a lot of engineering talent in China. So we've been making a big effort to like integrate the software engineers from China into our software team. And it wasn't easy in the beginning. We would have conversations and just conveying very technical topics, like how do you write high quality code? This code is not clean. This is not this part of the section is not architected properly. This doesn't have enough unit tests, that kind of thing. Getting really into it was very difficult.
Yeah.
But I have one of the engineers on my team is a native Chinese speaker. And so we would have conversations where we'd be going for like, we'd be just trying to explain some topic for about 5 minutes. And then this guy we wouldn't be making any headway. And this guy would just pop in, speak for like 15-20 seconds in Chinese. And then the other engineers in China would be like, oh, how much? Like they'd understand completely. It's like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
And I was like, I mean, night and day difference, they're just cutting through the ambiguity because he could speak the language. And there was other things too that he was able to bring up, like just culturally, like this is how you should approach it. So, I mean, there's just a huge difference having someone who's a native Chinese speaker being able to talk to the China team. So we began sort of the process of integration. And at the same time, I walked into Barnes & Noble's and I found this book called Memory Craft by Lynn Swan, Lynn Kelly. And the book was written by a memory champion. And she just talked about how she applied using memory techniques to a lot of stuff. And she really focused on practical things like learning the periodic table, learning the order of the planets. And one thing she mentioned was learning Mandarin. She didn't really get too in depth about the techniques that she used, but I just thought it'd be like a very interesting kind of intellectual challenge to see how can I apply memory techniques to learning Mandarin. So that's what I did. I downloaded a couple of different apps. And I think first I started with Memrise, and then I went through their words, and they had this sort of SRS system. And so what I would do was when I would see a word, before I would move on, I would try to think of some mnemonic for this word. And I tried to incorporate the tone in it as well. So one example was an earlier word that I had to learn was the word Shay. And that means who. So I have a friend named Shane, and I just imagined like seeing Shane standing there and someone goes to like Shay, and then they'd be like who, and that's how I remembered Shane. So I did that for some time, and using that I got some good progress early on. I think I memorized like 20-30 words by the end of that first weekend. Now granted, I had put in like 10 hours. I put in a lot of time. So now looking back on it, I don't think that was a very good haul, but I was like super impressed with myself at the time. And then the next day I went to the office and I was like, guys, I learned 30 words over the weekend. At this rate, I will be like conversational in Chinese in a month. I just like told everybody that. So I could not back out. I could not back out at that point. So I kept on doing that. But then I found that like there were some words where I was trying to figure out just these like basic mnemonics. So my technique at the time was to find some like language, some English word that kind of sounded like that, and then think of some physical object that I could place in my memory palace, and I just like take a trip down, and that's how I'd review stuff. But there were some words where I would just like think about it for like an hour, just trying to find
Yeah.
one mnemonic for this, because Chinese and English just do not sound similar enough.
Right. Right.
And I had a system for encoding tones. So my system was if it's like second tone, then they're like jumping up. If it's third tone, they're like lying on the ground. If it's fourth tone, they're like doing something violent. If it's first tone, they're chilling out. But I often had trouble forgetting that as well.
Right.
So anyways, that was one thing that I did. And then I read James Heisig's books. The book about learning Chinese characters by using these kind of also using memory techniques. So I read that, but so that was one other thing that I read, and I found it useful for memorizing characters, but I didn't really feel like there was a syllabus to it. In the same thing with the apps too. Like I was learning these like random words, but it didn't feel like the syllabus really made sense. I didn't really feel like I was making progress in a direction that was more than just these very, very set areas that I could speak in. But then I was like, hey, let's go get lunch. And they'd be like, okay, what do you want? And I'd be like, I have no idea how to say any type of cuisine. I have no idea how to say anything other than like apples or mangoes, which is not something I eat for lunch, you know?
Right. Right.
So those were two things that I found interesting. And then I did some more research into I looked on art of memory, and I looked if anyone had any advice on learning Mandarin. And one thing that came up was this thing called the Maryland method, which was encoding the first and the last sound using memory techniques. So I read the Maryland method, but it didn't feel like a super well constructed system. It felt like it was a very interesting. I shouldn't say well constructed. It was a really good idea, but it didn't feel like it had met its end point. You know, it felt like a work in progress. So, so I Googled the Maryland method to see if anyone else had taken it further, and that's how I found you guys. Along the same time, I also looked on Google Scholar, and I did some research into optimal character learning. And I found, optimal character order. There was a research paper. I don't remember who the author was, but he also said like there's an optimal order to learn characters, which is both based on frequency as well as how characters have dependencies. So all of that is a long way of saying like all of this independent research I had done for a month before I found you guys had compiled it into this one thing. And actually like a lot of the kinks that I had not found solutions to, you guys already worked out. So I thought that was really, really cool. And over the past month, I've been using your system, and it's fantastic. It's like you guys have really ironed out all of these like little things that I was finding stumbling blocks on.
Yeah. Wow. I got to tell you, listening to that was like so interesting because I was like, I wonder what what the next step is gonna be, because it was like you were describing my story and Luke and I's story from a few years ago. Because the types of questions you were asking were the types of questions we were asking each other. We would go like, this Heisig thing. I mean, I like what he's doing, but how are we gonna do the pronunciation with this? Because doesn't it drive you crazy that he doesn't do the
Yeah.
pronunciation? And then we were like, and then Luke, was like, oh, I found this blog post called the Maryland Method. I mean, this was like 6 or 7 years ago at this point, but and then we were like, yeah, this is really great. And so we started applying it, but then we were like, but what it made me realize was there's a weakness in the Heisig method, which is that the character learning order is not optimal because he didn't consider pronunciation, because he was like, well, you can't learn pronunciation. It was his theory at the time. And so he was like, since you can't learn pronunciation, let's focus only on common components between characters and less on frequency. And so we were like, well, that's no good if you want to make a beginner course, because if you want to make a beginner course, you need to focus more on frequency. And our favorite example of that is that the character na, which is one of the most frequent characters, is taught at 1,430 something in the Heisig book. And so it's like, we're like, that's too late to learn such a common character. For us, it's like in the 200s or maybe 300 or something. It is a kind of weird character, but it's like, which is why he waited to do it till late, but it means that. So it's a very important character and you should learn it early. And so, and the other point I wanted to comment on is that you were saying you had trouble communicating to the Chinese coworkers you were about like certain coding things or whatever. And one of the things that I think that a lot of Westerners will do is they'll say, "Oh, this is just a cultural difference." And sometimes that can be the case. I'm not saying that's what you did, but like sometimes they'll go, "Oh, they're not getting it, and it must be a cultural thing." And I'm like, sometimes, but sometimes it's just a language thing. Sometimes it's just the way they're interpreting the English is
Yeah.
not the, it's like if you just learned the proper Mandarin for it, they would get it really quickly. So I was glad to hear that you had that experience because many of those problems can be solved just through language acquisition. So that was a really comprehensive answer. So that you kind of in that answer that you gave answered the first three questions I would have asked you. So let's just get right into your experience of the course. So um, as you've been going through, since obviously you knew already about the memory techniques and you knew about how to kind of do some of this stuff, it must have been not as difficult to kind of get onto what we were saying. So, like, now that you've done it, how long do you think it takes you to learn a character from, and I'm talking like everything about it, like the
Right, right.
stroke order and the meaning and all of that stuff?
Yeah. So this is something which maybe my answer will be different in about a month as
Yeah.
I get further
Oh,
along the
you will get
course.
better. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. So right now, there's of course constructing the scene, so that's not too difficult for me. I think if I need to construct a scene for hard ones, maybe it takes like 2 3 minutes. For easier ones, I can do it in like a minute, minute and a half. But
Mhm.
then I was also making an effort to make sure that I would be able to remember these characters. Because when I'm like, I would say over the past month, I've been spending like 2 hours a day on this. So that's a lot of
Mhm.
characters. I wanted to make sure that I remembered every single one of them. So what I would do was after I finished learning a series of characters, I would store them in my memory palace, and like as I was like sleeping or eating dinner or whatever, I would just like run through all of the characters that I learned in my memory palace and just try to
Mhm.
visualize drawing it as well as the sound. And
Okay.
that actually took a while. That really did take a while. Um, but now that I'm kind of getting, so I think I just finished chapter 13. So now that I'm
Mhm.
seeing the top down stuff as well and seeing them in sentences, it's just so much easier for me. I'm remembering the sounds. I'm remembering them in context. I immediately, yeah, I guess there's a couple of things which I was really making an effort for because I think learning the characters was helpful, but I was also trying to get my recall speed faster.
Mhm.
Yeah, because I would see cards on Anki and it would take me like, sometimes it would take me a second, sometimes it would take me 5 seconds. And I wanted to have every card at like instantly, I know what it is, just to have that bridge formed.
Oh, sure. Sure.
Um, yeah. So factoring that in, I think maybe it was like 5 or 6 minutes per character. But again, now that I'm kind of getting into the top down stuff and the grammatical sentences and all of them together, it might be redundant for me to do that. So
Mhm.
yeah, so probably like 2 3 minutes per character.
Yeah, I can definitely recommend that. I totally get that feeling of like I want to have a faster recall, and that what the thing is, there's sort of two games you're playing. You're playing the small game, which is can I recall this character, but because you're doing this every day, you're also building up your skills on a larger on a larger scale. And while you're at level 13 now, but I guarantee you by the time you're at level 20 or something, especially with characters, you're going to have done it long enough that you've gotten faster at like the meta game, and so you'll end up moving through it much more quickly, which you can't really experience until you've done it long enough, but you will get there for sure. Um, okay, cool. So let's see here. So now that you kind of touched on this a little bit, but like as you've gone into phase three and you added a little more context, that has had an impact. So what if you could kind of maybe boil it down to two or three points in the Mandarin blueprint method that you feel have had the biggest impact so far in sort of your Chinese learning? What would you say? Like sort of I mean, obviously there's the general stuff you've been talking about with the character learning, but
Yeah.
yeah, what would you say are kind of the biggest points about it that make it effective for you?
Well, the number one thing is that it's fun. The other stuff was I would have to make a game of it for myself. I would have to see like, okay, um, today if I'm using this app, if I'm using Memrise, I can just get through this number, and I would use that to motivate myself. But inherently, I didn't really find it that enjoyable. Whereas constructing these scenes, constructing these stories is it sometimes I come up with stories which like make me laugh,
Yeah.
and I get to see these very interesting characters. Uh, so it's fun. It's really enjoyable. It's much more of a creative exercise than when I was sitting in high school Spanish and just kind of grinding out these rote memorizations. So that absolutely is the number one thing. The other thing is kind of this, well, it's the combination of all these little memory techniques and the other stuff I've been researching. But the number one, the best memory technique, I would say, would be the construction of initials and finals. I think that solves the biggest challenge I had, which was coming up with some representation of sounds that really do not exist in English.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third thing, let me see. Well, the third thing is kind of the character order. Character order is, let me think about that actually. No, actually, I would say the props. I would say the character technique. Memorizing the characters by using props and kind of combining them within the story. I almost never forget characters. Or if I see a character and I'm not sure what it means, I'll like break it down into its constituent props, and I'll be like, okay, where have I seen a magic wand before? Where have I seen Woody from Toy Story? Oh, okay, that's what this is.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm so glad that you have that type of perspective on it because, while the Mandarin Blueprint method, it's still a work in progress. Obviously, we have 1,530 characters at the moment. We want to get it to 3,000 and, have everything there. But what's nice is that by the time you get to the end of the intermediate course and you finish those 1,530 characters, you'll know all the important props. I mean, there'll be a few left for you to learn, but you'll know them. So even the remaining ones you should be able to quickly put together, especially with somebody who already had an attitude of like, let me figure this out for myself. So somebody like you're an ideal member of the course because you'll already take the initiative to figure out the later stuff, because we just want to, what I always feel as a course creator is like, I want to kind of hurry up and finish the course for people so that they have what they need, but obviously you got to do it right, so it takes time. And so that's good to see that you have that initiative there. I feel very confident that you'll continue to have success with it even after you get to the end of our materials. So that's awesome. So normally we would ask what you were skeptical about with the course, but I imagine that since you were not, usually what people are skeptical about is the memory techniques, but seeing as you were already sold on that, having read books like Moonwalking with Einstein. Yeah, exactly. Right. So, what was there anything else though you were skeptical about, or were you kind of like, no, this looks like this is the right thing?
No, I think this is what I was looking for. It was literally a compilation of all of the memory techniques. I mean, you guys spent a lot more time thinking about it than I have, and I was like, finally, somebody is going along the same route, is traveling the same road that to me is obvious as the best way to learn a language.
Right. Okay, cool. That's good to hear. Well, how about any suggestions for how we could improve the course, like sort of, at any level of detail, even if it's just like, I don't know, Phil, improve your face. It's too ugly or something like that. I don't know. Like anything we can improve for the course?
Well, I can tell you that one piece that I found kind of helpful for me was when I was learning numbers. That was one thing which I felt like was really, really important for me to have like an instantaneous recall on. So what I would do is, in order to just like get sure that my speed on that was just like literally, I see a character, I know what the sound is. There's no moment between my brain and that. Was I would go to random.org and I would generate like a list of numbers from 1 to 100, and I would just do that for like 30 minutes, just like say every number on it, and so I got my speed up, and that really helped me get my speed up. So that's what I was thinking about earlier before I got into the top-down stuff. Was I think that I think that everything is awesome, but I need to get my recall speed up. But now that I'm getting more into top-down stuff, and I looked ahead in the course a little bit to see that there's stories and more sentences, my guess is that might serve the same function in a more enjoyable way than literally just like generating random numbers and just spending 30 minutes. Yeah, that was a rough time when I was just spending like 30 minutes or an hour after work every day just reading random numbers.
Yeah, I can see how maybe for some people they might not be too excited about that particular drill.
Yeah,
Although that's doubly good though, because obviously it's good to be able to quickly read numbers in Chinese, but also it's good for practicing your different tone pairs and tone combinations, because it
yeah,
they all naturally come up if you learn the different numbers. So that's not a bad idea. Maybe we could put together a little like quick drill or some quick quizzes that are just like, hey, how would you say this? And yeah, that's a good idea. Okay, cool, nice. Um, all right, well then the final question we have for you is just would you recommend Mandarin Blueprint to somebody who's not heard of us before?
I have already.
Oh, okay, nice.
Yeah, I have
Awesome.
recommended to a couple people actually.
Cool. Well, this has been really interesting to hear your story, Faraz. I hope that more people who are interested in memory athletics, it's always been my kind of pie in the sky hope that sometime we'll get some people to join the course that aren't necessarily interested in Mandarin, but they're interested in memory athletics. And I think if anybody's like that, I might send them this video because obviously
Awesome,
you're in that realm. Well, this has been a pleasure, Faraz. Thank you so much for taking the time and. Let's check in with you in a couple of months and see how you're doing.
awesome. That sounds great. Thanks a lot, Phil.
You got it.
谢谢你观看我们的这个视频. If you found this video valuable and you'd like us to help you reach fluency and literacy in Mandarin Chinese as fast as possible without all the headache of traditional learning methods, just head to mandarinblueprint.com to learn more. Also, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the bell below to be notified every time we release a new video. And of course, 保重